Hi everyone. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Thank you. Are we in a civil war? As I understand it, yes, we are. The evidence is palpable, even if you don't consider astrological patterns. But when you do, it's pretty clear. And this goes to answer the question that many have asked: how can this be happening? How is it possible that we're in an election like this with so much acrimony and with two candidates that are so far apart, one of whom is basically both demented as well as stupid and dangerous, and many other adjectives that fall into the category of unmentionable and horrible. It's where we are. And first level of that, in terms of the astrological patterns, major planets today, by which I mean Uranus and Neptune. Uranus has an 84-year cycle, Neptune has a 165-year cycle. And then we have also to throw in Pluto, 250-year cycle. Now Pluto was not a factor in the Civil War of the 1860s, but Uranus and Neptune definitely were. And it's actually Uranus and Neptune that have repeated in the US story, literally, since the country's formed in 1776, and it is one Uranus turn later, Uranus in its 84-year cycle, which is concurrent approximately with Neptune getting halfway there. This happens in the 1850s and into the early 1860s, and the theme is very similar today in that back then what was happening was that the South wanted to create essentially what amounted to a nation featuring slavery in all the states. This is something that people sometimes forget. Lincoln had offered the South to just stay in their lane. You guys can do it, you just can't expand. But they wanted to expand. This is, by the way, separately, one of the problems with the expansion principle in astrology. Jupiter, everyone always goes on about Jupiter bringing everything good. Jupiter can overexpand, and when it overexpands, it will get in trouble. And that's a classic example. It's one thing that they were doing it for themselves. They wanted it to grow. They had dreams of an empire doing this very thing. Lincoln opposes it, and it led to a hot civil war at the time. Now today, Neptune is back to where it was then, during the Civil War years, hence the discord, because Neptune can be very ideological, and so there are two sides, two intense points of view. Uranus is similar as well. Uranus is the most independent energy, whether it's in a personal chart or in a national chart, and so it also correlates with difficult conditions. Indeed, the in-between cycle to this is the Second World War, when Neptune then had done its full turn, so Neptune is back to where it started. It returns to the same spot, and so the country then is united to fight the Nazis at the time in the Second World War. And Uranus had done its second turn at that point. Now Uranus is on its third turn, Neptune is halfway, like when it was during the Civil War. But however, it's not quite exactly that way either, in the sense that because they're not exactly one turn and half a turn, now, in contrast to the Civil War of the 1860s, the Uranus return happens a little bit later, which is helpful. It's very helpful, because if you put two planets together, you get a lot more trouble. Indeed, this is what happened in the pandemic. When you cluster planets in a place, Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and Capricorn, the entire world enters into difficult conditions, and the US happened to be experiencing that as one of the worst countries, in part because of the astrology, because we're a Cancer country, those planets are in Capricorn, they oppose, but also in part because we had an idiot for a president. I mean, it's amazing to me that it isn't being said more how grossly incompetent this man is, this total imbecile. He is responsible for many of those COVID deaths. Country up the road, Canada, who people are always saying, oh yeah, that's the socialist health system and all that. Yeah, but they have more common sense, and a lot less people per capita died in Canada than in the US. So this is just clear mismanagement. But anyway, I digress. The point is, one way or the other, we're in a cold civil war in the sense that just like in the 1850s and into the 1860s, there is an intense disagreement on what basically amounts to race, because back then, I mean, it's black and white, no pun intended. It's so obvious in the sense that they wanted to continue slavery, they wanted to expand it, whereas now we're talking more about the fact that the country, through years and years of immigration, it's more diversified, and as many have said, it's turning brown. The white populace is resentful about this, and so they've grown angry, and Trump's genius, in this case, if you want to call it that, not the way he calls himself genius, but in the sense of tapping into these kinds of fears and resentments and so on, it works, and so then you have these two sides clearly defined. But, you know, as often happens, these cycles repeat, but they're not quite perfect, not quite precisely aligned. And so one thing is what I said. You've got the fact that Uranus happens a little later. That certainly means that it's a good thing. It's less likely to, for example, lead to a hot war, the way it happened in the 1860s. And then, mentioned earlier, there's also Pluto, because Pluto is, during this period, returning. And so that adds to the tension, because it feels like a really key moment when the country is deciding some really big things. And also Pluto, it has strong connections on the downside, because these planets have an up and a downside. The downside of Pluto is fascism. Pluto and authoritarianism, totalitarian behavior, autocracy, plutocracy, hence Pluto. That's what we're in. Right? So that's the three outer planets, the three outer planets up until 2005, when Eris joins the parade. You'll recall that Eris led to the demotion of Pluto. Eris, ironically, this is what astronomers do. They name these planets exactly what they are. So the myth of Eris is a warrioress. It's an angry goddess that it has been left off the table. She's been left out of the party. She doesn't like it. She wants to be included. Hence, this is the energy of Eris, and you know right away, this is why women have been rising in power since 2005. Not just women. You can point to, for example, gay marriage has passed after 2005. People that have been left behind catch up under Eris. And so that's another aspect to the current civil war. It's literally the battle between Pluto and Eris, which already manifested itself in 2020, because in 2020, these planets were still square. You know, they're both slow movers, Eris especially. So if they're doing something in the sky, they don't do it for a week or two or even a year or two. They do it for quite some time. Back then, they're directly square. When you think about it, what happened in 2020? 2020, Joe Biden is elected because of women. Had men only voted, they would have put Trump back in, just like today. If only men vote, he wins the presidency. But it's not only men that vote, women also vote. And women actually are the greater percentage of the electorate, and women have something to be angry about as well. Because, why? Because men are trying to take away their rights. They're trying to tell them what to do with themselves, which is a really bad idea. the sense that they have a large portion of the vote, and they're voting in large numbers because there's an immediate issue that is very important to them. And so in the sky, you still have Pluto square Eris. It's no longer as tight as it was in 2020, but it's definitely there, certainly by sign. And indeed, right now, Pluto is just at the very end of Capricorn as we go to vote, with Eris in Aries. The question is, which of those two wins the battle? Just like in 2020, Eris wins the battle. Because Eris in the American chart happens to be a stronger, more dominant planet than Pluto. Of course, you might then say, well, if that's true, why didn't women have a force, be more powerful sooner? Well, part of that is that that's where the world was, and part of it is that Eris isn't discovered until 2005. So, point being, though, Eris in the American chart opposes Sun, Jupiter, Venus. Pluto opposes Mercury. Of those two, Eris carries more power. And certainly now, Eris is transiting in Aries. I don't want to confuse you too much. That's why I actually refer to it as Eris. Some people call it Aries, but then it sounds like Aries and Aries. It gets all confusing. Eris, the planet beyond Pluto, with its 550-year orbit, is transiting in Aries, has been transiting in Aries since 1920, which is interesting because that's when women first got the vote. They were able to vote. But they didn't really start voting for themselves until late in the 20th century, which is what led to more and more democratically elected governments, or rather, you could say the Republican Party has only won once through the popular vote since the late 80s. Either way, Eris squaring Pluto in the sky, Eris is stronger. Pluto is in Capricorn, Eris is in Aries, it's a warrioress. Aries is a military sign, literally, so it has more force there. Furthermore, right now, in the sky, Eris is squaring the American Mercury. So it's definitely there as a force. And this is what has led me to say that Kamala Harris will be elected president because she is so representative of that force in the world and the American psyche. I mean, for one thing, her moon, her own moon, is in Aries, right near where the Eris is transiting now. That's how you see the symbolism in astrology. So then the question is, if I say, who wins the Civil War? The side that is aligned with Eris. Therefore, Kamala is elected. Does that mean that the situation settles down immediately? Not likely, because the other planets are part of it as well. And so what happens is the Neptune, back to Neptune, describing it as to where it was in the Civil War, where it was in the Second World War, etc. It's in sensitive degrees for the next 2 to 4 years. In fact, the same degrees when people were actually fighting. They were fighting and killing each other back in the 1860s. My sense of this is that this is just the resistance that will be put up to the new order. Because the other thing that's happening here too is where you got all these cycles moving together. And Pluto is just about to enter Aquarius. People keep saying, I read these comments on the channel, and it's true. They talk about the age of Aquarius. Well, if you want the age of Aquarius, the new world, which, by the way, Aquarius is a people sign. People have more freedom. Aquarius is the idea of the individual and society interacting in a democratic way. So Pluto going there, strongly suggestive of that being enhanced, not fascism. Fascism works with Pluto in Capricorn, where it has been since 2008. And you can tell because the world has been experimenting with that to some extent. Bolsonaro was there as the leader when Trump was the president of the US. And we still have a number of people, definitely people like Putin and Xi and so on. But where Pluto is going now, to Aquarius, where it'll be for 2 decades, is much more suggestive of democratic rule. But you have to go through it. You have to go through the pain, in the sense that just because you win, it doesn't mean you totally win. However, I hope this helps people to some extent to relax a little bit about this, in that, to me, it's absolutely clear which side has the upper hand, and things are moving in the right direction, even if more slowly than we would want them to. It's that simple, and it's a matter of being patient, and of course, the fact that I may say these are the cycles on the practical level, of course people have to vote. I see those comments on the channel all the time. Of course. I mean, this is the whole idea, is you bring it down to earth by voting. Nevertheless, that's the way it's pointing based on the big cycles. Here I'm not talking about necessarily, other than what I said about Kamala, when I'm saying it's remarkable that her moon position is so close to the transiting Eris at this time, but I'm not reflecting too much more about her particular chart or Trump's chart. I'll be doing more of that. I already talked about progressions. You'll see some upcoming videos where I talk about other movements and what they reflect as well. To conclude, for now, what's the bottom line? The bottom line is cold civil war with a strong component of a gender war. And in this war, women emerge victorious, and therefore women are going to save this republic.